Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 9 to Side podcast, where we chat with super amazing and inspirational people who pounded the pavement before and after their 9 to 5s to get their side hustles off the ground. After listening to the interviews with these amazing guests, you'll walk away with a refreshed pep in your step and a newfound motivation to make your side hustle a reality. Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 7 of season 1. Thanks for listening. My next guest is in the performance space, and I have to say I have a super soft spot in my heart for performers because I'm a wannabe performer. I've always loved performing. I don't know. It doesn't matter if it's for 3 friends at a party or on stage for 100 people. I love performing. It's so scary, but so exhilarating. And there's something about putting yourself out there that is like making yourself incredibly vulnerable to a bunch of strangers and a bunch of people that is both terrifying, but also so, like I said, exhilarating. I don't know. There's something so addicting about it. I love talking to people who are in the performance space. And I came to the city right out of college and I went to school for broadcast journalism. I was like, I'm going to move to the city and I'm going to get my own talk show. It's going to be great and I'm going to be famous. And that did not happen. Yeah, it's a lot harder, obviously, than one would imagine. So I did a lot of performance stuff along the way to try to get to, where I wanted to be. I did some stand-up comedy. I did some improv. I was an extra a bunch of times on some random networks that probably don't even exist anymore. But I would wait in those lines where they had those casting calls just for the chance to potentially be in the background, like the way, way background where no one would see you. I'd be like, yes, I made it. And I wasted my whole afternoon waiting in line. I was so excited about that back in the day. And that was in my 20s. I was just so passionate about trying to become, I don't know what, I don't know what I thought was going to happen. But like I said, I really wanted my own talk show. And then I realized, as I got older, my parents were like, you really need to get a job and some health insurance because this isn't panning out. Obviously, I didn't have my own talk shows, so I needed to face that harsh reality and get a job. So I got a job and I still did a bunch of stuff on the side. I've done some storytelling classes. I've always done performance stuff, but my 9 to 5 became my focus. I had to get real and start working like everybody else. And so I think there's just something about performing in that kind of world, because it is so difficult to make money and make it, that as you get older, as you get out of your 20s and your early 30s, it becomes less and less of a realistic possibility, right? Like you lose that aspirational dream that you had, that twinkle in your eye when you came out of high school and you're like, I'm going to make it. You're like, no, I'm not actually going to make it and I have bills to pay. And it becomes a little sad and depressing. So my next guest is such a dear friend of mine, an amazing colleague. I've known him for so many years. But one of the things that I just love about him is that he defies all of that because he's not in his 20s and he has loved performing his whole life and he has never let that slip away. And yes, he does have a 9 to 5 and he's, always had jobs, but he's actually hitting his stride right now in his later years, not even close to being in his 20s. And he's just taken that love of performance and really kicked it up a notch. And he's written cabaret shows. He's performed multiple cabaret shows. He's been nominated for a MAC Award, which is, something that honors the achievement of cabaret comedy and jazz. He has his own podcast. He has a YouTube channel. I mean, I feel like he's taking off and I just feel like he's building up so much momentum. And when I talk to him, it gets me excited because it makes me feel like, okay, just because I'm in my 40s and I have kids doesn't mean that I can't go back and pursue these things. And that to me is just such a great message. And it should be a message to everyone. Like, it does not matter what age you are. It doesn't matter where you are in your life. If you love performing and you love doing something, then do it. That is what John's all about. And he does not have a care in the world about what people think. He just puts himself out there and he's incredible. He writes all his own shows. He stones his own costumes. I mean, the amount of rhinestones that are on these costumes are insane. I've been to them and I his shows and I look at the rhinestones. I'm like, I don't know how long that took you, but it's an impeccable work. Anyway, I love John and I think he's amazing. And I hope you enjoy my interview with John Burns. Welcome, John Burns. Thanks so much for joining me.
I couldn't be happier to be here, Alexandra.
So tell everybody, let's start with kind of a little bit about you and like a little background about who you are, what you do in your professional sort of day 9 to 5 job. And then we'll get into all of your various side hustles because I feel like you have a lot. You are so talented.
No, I love that you call them side hustles. I think they actually qualify as hobbies.
No.
Even though there is income generated by them, but it's not enough.
No, but there is income. There's a revenue stream because you do sell tickets.
Stream. Yes.
Mm-hmm. You have listeners for you. Well, we'll talk about all the different things because you've got a variety of side hustles.
So I work at a theater marketing company. I've had this job longer than I ever thought I would have a job. And to be honest, I was someone, when I was young, I decided that my life was not going to be about earning money. And if there's one decision that I wish I could take back, it might be that one. Although I will say I had a lot of fun.
I would argue you've had more fun than most people who made the opposite decision.
To be honest, I kind of knocked around for the majority of my life from job to job, different things. I worked in printing. I worked at a magazine, but all along I've always been musical and a performer. And I actually moved to New York. I live in New York. We should say that. I'm from New Mexico. I grew up on a cattle ranch, about as opposite of New York as you could get. But I always dreamed of living in New York. But I made it real. I made it happen. But really, what motivated all the moves in my life was performing, singing, then, of course, gay. I'm a big gay. And in New Mexico, I was so tired of dating the latest alcoholic to hit the scene. And I thought, there must be healthy men in New York. Well, I was wrong. There are no healthy gay men anywhere, but you learn to enjoy what it is. So
when you were younger from New Mexico, you always loved performing. How come you didn't decide, and you always had sights on New York, coming to New York? That was always in your sights, even when you were younger, right?
Oh, so many mistakes. I made a lot of bad choices. I should have majored in theater, but I didn't do it. I majored in computer science when I was in college, and that really was not a good choice. That was a choice about making money.
Okay. So that was why you wouldn't have done that. You did that because you thought I'm
like, oh, well, I'm good at this. And, seems to be where the money's coming lately. Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, even in high school, like I was in a band, and I can remember meeting the theater kids in college and being like, oh, I would love to be part of them. But it never occurred to me that I could just go be part of them.
And why do you think that is? Do you think it's just because you didn't see like a path to support yourself doing something in the arts?
Maybe. For whatever reason, it didn't happen. And I really came to performance after college. Okay. I became involved in theater after college in New Mexico, not just a theater, but also music. I sang with the symphony choir and whatever. So eventually I just couldn't stay in New Mexico any longer. I'd done everything New Mexico offered, and I hightailed it out there, and I moved to New York, and best thing I ever did. Mm-hmm. If anyone who's thinking about moving to New York, do it, because it might be a little tough, but whatever you want to do, you can do it here.
Right.
And it's really true in a way that's not as true other places. So I highly recommend moving to New York if you think that's something you would like to do.
And when you moved to New York, did you always have the hobbies of performance on the side? Like you moved to New York and you got into what, TV? Because did you work at TV Guide?
I worked at TV Guide, which is actually a magazine. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I worked at TV. That's the job I got through the temp agency. But I was auditioning. And to be honest, when I look back, if I would actually have devoted a little more attention to performing, I might have had a career because I worked with great people. But I literally did 11 auditions, and I started working with a voice teacher, David Jones of the David Jones Studio. And after 11 auditions, I kind of had to work for a while. And out of the blue, I got a call to be in a show. When I did that, that led to another show. And so I really had some great experiences with some great people. Like, no one knows any of these people: Ricky Ian Gordon, Patricia Birch, Tina Landau, David Friedman, who are, names that people know. They have Tony nominations among them and stuff. But it was always a lot of fun, and I always enjoyed it. But I never was able to feel like I could just quit my slave job, quit my day job. I always kept the job at TV Guide, and actually in those days, that was my side hustle. I had a church job for a while where I was the tenor section leader for a church choir.
That was your full-time job, or that was
that's a side hustle. It did pay, it had a salary, but it was always a side hustle. Yeah.
Were you doing that after? So you would do the TV Guide job?
I did that at TV Guide. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because the church job, it's, one rehearsal Wednesday night, and then you did Sunday morning.
So you could always do it after your 9 to 5.
Yeah,
you could do it at night and then on the weekends.
The job at all. No.
So I feel like you're a little bit unique in that, in some of the other people that I'm speaking to, in that even though they may have had kind of like a little seedling of what their side hustle might become, you have always really had your side hustle. Like you've always had it. You've always had your full-time job. But I feel like in the last few years since I've known you, it's really blossomed into something more that you've really fostered and kind of taken to a different level. Like,
absolutely. I would agree with you. And thank you for thinking that, because that's the way it feels. So after those experiences in the 90s performing, just to not drop a few more names, Kristen Chenoweth. I did a show with Kristen Chenoweth.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I did a show. Kristen Chenoweth, J.K. Simmons, and I were in a show together.
And you never, after any of those, there was never an opportunity to get an agent to take it further, or
No, I never got an agent, but all those shows led to other shows because I started working with a couple of composers, and then people, as they were talking to their composer friends, they would say, I'm needing someone to do this. And they say, oh, well, John Burns can really do that. So,
cool.
It was really, I never really did, other than those first 11 auditions, I never really auditioned. I would just get calls.
Which is amazing. So was there ever a time, because I feel like I knew you and I didn't really, I heard about some of the stuff in the past, but was there a time where you stopped doing the performing for a while? So
there was a time when I stopped. And that kind of, after 9/11, I went out west for a while for a lot of different reasons. And when I was out west, I went back to college. I focused on theater and things I enjoyed. And during that time in New Mexico, I did start performing again. And I was like, oh, you know what? This is what I really love. And so then I came back to New York. I was out west, I think 3 or 4 years. I moved out west for a job at the rodeo, if you can believe it.
Oh yeah, you gotta give your backup, because rodeo is huge, right?
Rodeo is huge out there. Yeah. So I work in ticketing. My first ticketing experience was at the Olympics. I forgot that.
Oh yeah, the Olympics is a huge part of your career.
Yes.
That's a big.
And that was really the break with the magazine. I was at TV Guide for a lot of years, and then I just quit one day because it was not working for me anymore. And I went to the Olympics and worked on a team, and somehow started doing ticketing at the Olympics. Came back, got a job. I was doing freelance work. And then I got a job at the San Antonio Stock Show as the ticketing manager. So that led me down what has become an actual career. I would say before that, I was just doing jobs. I worked at the magazine, but it was always just a day job. My real love was always performing.
Right.
But the ticketing actually turned into a career. And I think it was because it combined live events and performance with business. So anyway, I came back to New York and I was not performing. My goal was to perform. I did a show, but also I was getting older. But then out of the blue, I went to see Ginger Minge, who is a RuPaul Drag Race finalist. She actually was just on the RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars, and she made it to the top 4. But
cool.
she did a show, and my husband Mike and I went, and she did a show at a theater here. And after the show, we all hung out at the bar. Ginger Minge, her music director, her backup singers, and we were just hanging out at the bar, drinking. And then we went to another bar and kept drinking. And like, you know, it was one of those wonderful nights in New York that you can have where you're just drinking a lot. But you could, that can be done nights so easily here because you're not driving. It's no big deal. So we were out. It was a holiday weekend, I think. Anyway, about 2 a.m, I was really drunk and I was talking to Ginger Minge's music director. And suddenly my dream became a possibility because I said to him, I'm like, oh, you don't do this just for Ginger Minge. You work with other people. Mm-hmm. And I said, you're based in New York, right? And he said, yes. And I said, I just want to sing. Can I make appointments with you and we'll just sing for an hour a week? That's really all I wanted to do. We'll just sing for an hour a week. So, and another twist of fate, his studio was half a block from our office.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
So it was, I'm really the path of least resistance. It's got to be convenient.
It's got to basically fall into your lap and be on your walk to work, or it's not going to work for you.
I can totally just duck out of work, and people may not even be aware, go sing for an hour and be back. And so after 2 sessions with him, he said, you have to do a show. And I was like, let's do a show. And we put together a show. And that was 6 or 7, I think 7 years ago.
And that was your first cabaret show. So that leads to the first first cabaret show,
which is something that I had dreamed about doing even in the 90s. I was like, oh, I wish I could do that. But somehow I just didn't connect dots. I was young and stupid and didn't have confidence, all those things. But then suddenly I'm a mature man and I'm more sure of what I can do. And anyway.
So you did your first cabaret show, which I came to see. I came to see several of them, which were amazing. Yes. You sold tickets to them.
I sold tickets.
They were at a venue in New York. Lots of people came to see. They were very well received, multiple nights. Now you've done, how many do you have under your belt that you've done?
I've got like 5 or 6. So the first one was called What Are You Waiting For? Because that was literally like the story of my performing life. What are you waiting for? Do it. Mm-hmm. I think the big thing that happened with that first show is the realization that I didn't need to wait for someone to cast me in something. I could create my own content because I have my own stories to tell. I don't need, there's a way for me to perform in a way that I can just do. So What Are You Waiting For was my first one. And then I did a show about growing up on the ranch called Gay Kid on a Cattle Ranch. Then I did a show with a friend of mine, Holly, who I think you knew.
Holly Dunn, yeah.
Yes, it was called 50 Shades of Gay. She's a lesbian. I'm a gay guy. And it was kind of a rom-com type of show where we did send up of rom-coms. Then I did a Shirley Bassey show, which once again was a big step up for me because it was not necessarily my own stories. I was telling stories, although my own story was woven in. And then I did a show called Sexy Beast, which is about me being a sexy beast. And all along, I developed kind of a persona and a real commitment to rhinestones.
You did. It's interesting about people's side hustles is that you dabbled in this side hustle kind of your whole life. Mm-hmm. And then I feel like since I've known you, not that you're older, but I think some people might at like a certain age, say like, whatever, that ship has sailed. I didn't do it when I was younger. I didn't get cast. I feel like you really hit your stride in the last couple of years and took what is a true passion of yours and made yourself like your own brand. And it's kind of branched off into different things for you as well.
Well, thank you. It kind of feels that way. It is something that I love doing and I seem to have some ability at, which I'm so thankful for. And people do seem to respond. But yeah, I love every part of what I do there. Mm-hmm. I love the producing part. I love the advertising part. Of course, I love singing and learning material and writing material. I always, I'm one of those people, you're like this. Everyone always like, oh, you're so funny.
Yeah.
But, and you're thinking, could I get on stage and be funny?
Right.
And there's a big leap from saying a funny quip here and there in a conversation and then getting on a stage and telling jokes.
Yeah.
And I think you've done that, right? You know what that is.
I did that like amateur comedy, but what I was really impressed with how funny your storyline was and how you tied that all together, because I think that was, storytelling, but in a humorous way. It wasn't just, kind of stand-up comedy getting up there. It was like an entertaining story with songs tied in, but also jokes in between, which was incredible. That's a true skill set. So, and you did it so well.
Well, thank you. And that is what I kind of learned, was taking this thing that people say you're funny and then turning it into something, writing stuff down, creating that story, writing a story and looking for the funny parts and looking for the beats. And, that's all like just the only way to do that is to do it.
Right.
Even if you took a class in writing, my husband is a writer. He takes classes in writing. And I've taken writing. I have taken writing classes. But do you know what you do in a writing class? You write.
Right. They just get you to start
they give
doing
you an assignment, which actually is the hardest part. It's the hardest part just to start.
Right.
You've got to actually do it. And once you start doing it, then it's just reworking it and you learn by doing it. And so I'm glad that you have responded and enjoyed it, but it's something to continue doing. I have to say, like, since COVID, I was a little, I'm looking for inspiration. I'm looking like, what's my next show going to be? When's the inspiration going to hit? I'm like, it wasn't coming. And then I took a class, just like a writing class. This was a singing class. It was singing rock and pop song. But what do you do in a class about singing? You sing. You pick songs and you sing. And through that process of doing it, I found my inspiration.
Yeah.
You can't wait for inspiration. You've got to start doing something and then it'll come together. Something will.
I think that's a really good tip. One of the things that I like to ask people, and what I'm asking is, what are your tips for other people who are interested in this? Because I think you did a lot of this stuff kind of along the way. What was the inspiration for you to just kind of take this step to actually turn it into, do you think you just, I don't know, we're at a place in your life where something came along and it just kind of clicked? Like, what was different about this time in your life that made it come together?
Part of it was I just started with the joy of it. When I first met William, the first inclination is I just want to do it. I don't need to do it in front of people. I just want to create a habit of singing every week, right? And that's that whole doing. I started meeting with him every week and we would just sing songs. I would bring in material that I was interested in. He would make suggestions. And so it was just that process of doing it week to week. So that got me started. And then he pushed me, find a collaborator. So he was a collaborator. It was a very easy thing to do, to set up a weekly session with a music director and sing. But then he pushed me and said, you really have a show in you. And so then we start conceiving of what that show is. So then you start putting your songs together. And then you start thinking about how do you weave a story through those songs. And so the important thing is you start.
Right.
And to have a regular process. The reason why COVID took me out of this was I didn't have that regular process of singing. And so when I took that class, it got me back there. So every week I was preparing a song or two. And suddenly by doing it, it's in the doing that the inspiration comes. And once again, I had a collaborator. I had a teacher. I had other classmates that were giving me feedback. So I'd say if you can't start on your own, which is really hard, it's really hard to sit down and write a joke, write a story. So find what is something that you can do that will put you on a track. So take a class, or find someone that you can work with. Even if it's a friend, have a friend that you meet once a week and talk through ideas of stories and stuff. Just create a habit and say that way, I'm a real deadline person. If I don't have a deadline, I'm not going to do it. And I think a lot of people identify with that. But once you have a weekly schedule, then you have a weekly deadline. And those are not big goals for each week, but just the process of having that then creates momentum, creates possibility. And then if in the bigger arc of me doing more than one show, then I start thinking about other aspects. The clothes I wore in the first show, I looked hideous.
Oh
my God, I wore a blazer and a shirt and some jeans. And
your clothes have evolved. I will say, though, every show you've really stepped it up.
So the second one, the cowboy show, I did get a hat and I got a Western shirt. And I'm like, okay, and started, to be honest, I never thought of someone who was into costumes. And suddenly I'm like, oh, no, I am not only into costumes, I'm really into costumes and feather boas and attachments and, props. And it was all about fun.
Yeah, I think that's a common theme that I hear from people who I'm talking to. And I think performing is particularly hard. And I, like you, have always my whole life been into not necessarily cabaret, but some type of performance. But it's very difficult unless you are a true performer and you're making a living out of that to visualize or see how you can do that as a side hustle or make that work aside from just kind of doing things here and there. But I think what you did about building your own brand and creating these cabaret shows, and that it starts with just like a true passion for what you do, which is you just wanted to sing every week and not worry about kind of like where it's going to go to, but just worry about what just brings you happiness. And it's like you also have your podcast too, which is another thing that you which tell everybody what the name of your podcast is, which came about in the last year or so.
Two Queens and a What?
I love that.
Two Queens and a What? And it's my husband and I, two gay guys living in Queens, two queens, and my young cousin Megan. We started it before the pandemic, but my cousin Megan and I were out to dinner. And, I always like to tell this story about when Mike and I met, we were dating, everything's great. You know how it is when you're dating, it's new. And one afternoon, 3 months in or so, we were walking through Central Park and I could tell Mike was struggling to make conversation. And I was like, I was a little not feeling up to talking so much. And you know how that is.
You're like, this can't be on me all the time.
I recognized that he was feeling like it was on him. He was really working to keep conversation going. So I said to him, I'm like, you know what? I'm really good just being here with you. We don't have to talk. And, I think we both just took a sigh of relief. And we really haven't spoken since, but it works. So anyway, I was telling my cousin Megan that, and I said, you know what? We should do a podcast so that Mike and I have to talk every week.
Oh, is that why you guys started it?
That was, and Megan being her ebullient and she was all in. She was like, oh, I love it. Let's do it. I think we just illustrated those things I said. It's like a desire, create a habit that we should do a podcast and so that we'll talk every week. So there's an idea, like make it a habit and then have a collaborator, which was Megan, who was all in.
Yeah.
And her enthusiasm fed my determination. So literally, we had that dinner. I came home. I bought the mic. I figured out where to do it. And I think within a week, we recorded our first episode.
Yeah. And how many episodes do you have now? A lot.
A lot. Yeah, I think 60 or 70. It might be. Because we started before COVID, and with a few exceptions, we've done one every week.
Which is incredible. I mean, and you guys do that because you just picked something that you like. You talk about different things every week, right?
Started just talking about, and it really is about things we like to watch, streaming things, movies. We would talk about plays we had been to, musicals we had been to, all of that. COVID happened. So then it became about what we were watching on streaming and also just talking about what life is like during COVID. And we've just continued on. So it really is over the course, we had different bits. Like we had a bit for a long time, 6 Degrees of Cindy Knight, who is I have a good friend who's a stage manager in the opera world. But we would, which is linked to another thing. We do Megan's movie school because Megan's younger than us. And there's a lot of like classic films she'd never seen. So we started watching a film every week and then discussing it, a classic film. So we would pick an actor or a director involved in one of these films, and we would challenge Cindy Knight to come up with a 6 Degrees of Separation.
Oh, fun. Interesting.
And so Cindy would write us a letter each week discussing her links to everyone. And it is amazing, all the people she has very close links to. Like to think that, we can watch Citizen Kane and Cindy's going to have a 6 Degrees of Separation link with someone involved in Citizen Kane, which was made in the 40s.
That's great. That is crazy.
But yet she was able to do it. Yeah, no.
That's so fun. I mean, I think those are things that people don't think about, just doing that kind of stuff. I mean, and I guess my question to you, how would you say start like launching your cabaret kind of brand and it's Johnburns.live basically
the website is Johnburns.live and there's links to my Instagram, to my YouTube channel, to the podcast, all there. But something else that happened during COVID, which is part of that cabaret world, for a long time, I got up every morning and I sang a song and posted it to my social media.
Oh, kitchen concerts. I forgot about kitchen concerts.
I did too, until we were talking about that. I was like, I started singing a song every day. And even, once again, those kind of some of them became kind of elaborate. I worked at like storytelling through that format of a short song. And I brought in costumes and props and to tell a story. It became delightful. And I did that. I think there's about 130 of them.
Yeah, you did a lot of those. And they became really varied it up with different costumes and backgrounds. And it was like, people loved when I danced. People went crazy, which is hilarious. People can't see me, but I'm a large guy. I'm 300 pounds and 6 feet tall. But if I was doing a dance song, like a regular kitchen concert might get 300 or 400 views every day, right? If I danced 2,000. Is that crazy? That's crazy. I love it. I forgot about, so you've got cabaret, kitchen concerts, and your podcast. So my next question, and then I want to kind of close with sort of, you gave your shout out of where we can find you, which is Johnburns.live. You're on Instagram, Facebook, and your podcast is listed up there as well. What would you say is next? Like if you could, I hate this question, people ask it, but I do like to ask it in terms of your interests. Like where do you see yourself in 5 years with Johnburns.live? What do you want to do? What's your next kind of goal for yourself?
Well, it's interesting. Before the pandemic, my goal was to take my cabaret to the next level, meaning create a show and travel with it. Go to Florida, go to, there's different cities you can do cabaret in. Post-COVID, it's definitely finding the next show. But I think I'm really excited about the possibility of streaming because, I have, through those kitchen concerts, I have a lot of old friends and made new friends that are not in New York. I have a whole group of people out west who would love to come to a cabaret, but just can't because of the distance, etc. So the idea of my next cabaret performance involving a streaming component that would allow a wider market, which I think is something we've found in our industry, is suddenly these theaters who off-Broadway theaters in New York started doing streaming content, and suddenly people around the world are watching their content.
That's so smart. I love that.
So I think that's where I want to go rather than traveling with a show. I'm like just trying to, it's all about leveraging that effort because it's a lot of effort and money to put on a show and to actually create that in a way that can live beyond that performance. Because, of course, there's nothing like being in the room, but finding out ways that I can take that experience and either video it better in a more presentable way and have it go further than just that performance. So
I love that. I think that's so smart. So working on your next show, basically. And then
that's really it.
And then would you do your other shows that you already have, do them again and then offer them up to be streamed for?
There are certain shows that actually, the other thing I was working on before the pandemic was restaging the Shirley Bassey show, which was called Don't Call Me Shirley.
Yeah, I love that one. I thought that was a great show.
Shirley Bassey. But reworking that to produce it again, but possibly. By the way, I think my new show is going to be called Johnburns Iconic.
Ooh.
Because the theme is singing songs by iconic singers. And then also the idea of iconic moments in your life.
So it will still have a story. It will still have a storyline element.
It'll still have a story. Part of this class, but anyway, my teacher, Farah Alvin, who is fantastic, but she said, just because it's like a big star is no reason to shy away from it. So I started singing Whitney Houston songs, and I'm like, wow, I can sing Whitney Houston songs. Who would have known?
Nice.
And so tackling those songs, which everyone, like on all the singing shows, they shudder away from because it's an iconic performance, but seeing if I can make those my own. So, and weave them into my story. So
that's great. So what's the time frame for that? Do you feel like that's going to be
I'm thinking the spring.
The spring? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. Well, we'll have to keep a lookout for it. So everybody can check out Johnburns.live, all your Facebook, Instagram.
It's Johnburns.live.
Johnburns.live. Sorry, to check out your Instagram, Facebook, and your podcast as well. Will you be bringing back the kitchen concerts? Are you going to keep it?
I do one every now and then. I'm not so inspired for them. At a certain point, you have a lot of clutter. Like if you go to my YouTube channel, there's like 130 videos. How can you pick one to watch? And I have playlists, but I think there is something to be said with having too much content. So, and actually one of the things I'm thinking about is like taking the content that's there and maybe edit it down and really have some highlights that I promote. I don't know. I'm sure I will, because the other part of it is my dear sweet mother who's older and she can't travel and she can't hardly see or hear, but she can experience one of those kitchen concerts and it can be meaningful for her. So anyway.
Well, that's great. Well, I can't thank you enough. I feel like this is incredible. You gave tips to everybody that I think are really valuable. I also think in closing, I know this wasn't necessarily intentional, but I think your strategy of working in live events and kind of incorporating, I know it's a side hustle, and I know you'll probably maintain it as a side hustle while continuing to work your full-time job. But I think it's nice if you can marry your two interests at all, like you have with your full-time career, which is working with performers and live events and ticketing. And that also kind of complements what your side hustle is. I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That I feel the same way. So, and I have to give a shout out to my husband, Mike Teele, because really, without him by my side, I couldn't have done any of it. So
yeah, Mike is amazing. I feel like he's the man behind the scenes too of all and he's so supportive. And whenever you're on stage, I feel like he's always there. And he does help you with the writing, doesn't he? Or do you edit it?
Yeah, I write it, but then I have him read through it and he points out things and I rework things and we discuss it. Sometimes I take his advice and sometimes I ignore it. It's like it's a real marriage.
That's what it's all about. The beauty of it.